I've been 3D printing and selling on Etsy for the last 4 years. I've been doing it full time though for the last 3 years. My Etsy shop sits amongst the top 1% of Etsy sellers and generates me 6 figures of income annually. That has not always been the case though. Today we're going to talk about how I went from being a real estate broker to running my 3D print farm from underneath my garage. Stick with me and I will share some of my failures during this process, but also some of my wins, and hopefully it'll serve as motivation for you as we head into 2024. To talk about where we are now, we first need to go back though and talk about where I came from. I've been a licensed real estate broker for the last 13 years of my career. I got my salesman license back in 2009, quickly pivoted and got my real estate broker's license in 2012, which gave me a lot more flexibility within real estate to do a lot more different things. I've been a licensed real estate broker since then, and I actually just let my license lapse at the end of last year in 2022, but I sold my last property in 2020. Throughout those 13 years, I did a lot in real estate. I worked in corporate real estate. I then transitioned into working for myself. My wife and I flipped houses for a number of years. We also bought and sold investment properties, some of which we still own today. And we also worked as just your average real estate agent, helping people buy and sell homes. The bread and butter of my business though is actually working with investors. I had carved out a niche for myself as being the go-to broker to help buy duplexes, fourplexes, even 12, 16 unit apartment complexes. And that was the majority of my business up until I quit real estate in 2020. At the height of that business, I was making well over $100,000 a year and really had no reason to not continue down that path. But let me tell you something, the real estate burnout is real. I'll be the first to admit though, I probably did not have the best systems in place to avoid this burnout. I did have a couple agents that worked underneath me, but they had their own client list they were dealing with, and I had my whole book of business that I was dealing with that kept me way too busy by myself for way too long. In 2019, I hit my wall and I found myself getting super annoyed whenever my phone would ring and I would see as a client. Think about the insanity of that. As a real estate agent, your phone is how you make money. You're constantly trying to get people to call you. Mine would ring and it would immediately put me in a mood. I'd be so annoyed. I'd have to go do showings on Saturday and Sunday. I just had a bad attitude all the time. Now let me be clear, my clients were doing nothing wrong. They weren't calling me at midnight. They weren't calling me 12 times throughout the day. They weren't, calling me over and over again until I answered. This was a me problem. I just had 13 years of real estate, working weekends, taking the phone calls all the time. And I just got to a point where I was just completely burnt out. I was actually introduced to 3D printing by my brother. He got involved with it way before I did. I came into a world that already had Prusa, that already had Creality, that already had Anycubic. He was tinkering around with 3D printing way back in the day when, you only had the one option of the super cheap pre-built, and you would use that pre-built to then print better parts so you could build your own printer. Like, he did some crazy stuff. I walked into an industry that for the most part was already consumer ready. I remember we were at a birthday party for one of our nieces or nephews, and him and I just started talking about 3D printing, and then somehow we got on Etsy, and he was like, yeah, there's people selling 3D printed stuff on Etsy, and it seems to be really cool. And I kind of was like, why don't we do that? You have the 3D printers. I have a little bit of a business background. I can make the Etsy page. I can do all the marketing material. I can get the orders. You then fulfill the orders and ship them out, and we'll kind of just split the business down the middle and split everything. So that's ultimately what we did, and we decided that we were going to sell 3D printed pots for succulents. And honestly, looking back at it now in 2019, we were probably ahead of our time with that. And had we really stuck with it and focused on that business, it'd probably be a pretty successful Etsy shop today. In the end, it was a failed Etsy experiment though. He definitely had the harder of the two jobs. I got to play with the Etsy algorithm and pictures on the evenings and weekends. He had the burden of actually having to print the item on time, package it, ship it out. And with his full-time job, it just became too much for him to handle. So we ultimately expired those listings, and that Etsy shop sat dormant until I picked it back up in 2019 with my own products, with my own 3D printer. I get the question a lot, where did the 3D Design Bros come from? That is the story of how 3D Design Bros came into existence. It's because it was going to be a shop with me and my brother. However, when that didn't work out, I did keep the Etsy shop, and I just kept the name as kind of a toast to my brother for getting me even started in 3D printing. I kept it as 3D Design Bros. There's a lot of things in life that I am not particularly good at. However, one thing that I have been fairly decent at is seeing opportunity when it's presented to me. And even though the succulent pot store did not work out as planned, I still saw an opportunity for selling 3D printed products on Etsy, and I decided I was going to venture down that path myself and get my first 3D printer. All right, everybody pause. Let's put our guesses in the comments of what my first 3D printer was. All right, you did it? Shocker, it was an Ender 3. After I bought the first printer and I was going to get my first listing up on my own, I don't know why, but I didn't go back to selling succulent pots. I really probably should have, because like I said, without much work, I was getting consistent sales with them. But at the time, I was pretty heavy into gaming. My kids had recently gotten to an age where I didn't have to put them to bed as much, and I had a little bit more free time. So I got back into gaming with some buddies of mine, and I decided that I was going to try to merge these two hobbies of mine, 3D printing and gaming. And that's what led me down the road of starting my Etsy shop with all sorts of different gaming controllers and headsets, stands, and mounts. I ended up putting my first listing on Etsy in August of 2019, and 3 hours after posting that listing, I got my first sale. Now, that's not normal by any means. Etsy algorithm blessed me with a sale on day one, but it really made me think like, man, this might be something. After that first sale, I would continue to get sales with somewhat consistency. I'd get 1 or 2 sales every 2, 3, 4 days. So nothing crazy, but they did come regularly every week. And then I got to November and I experienced my first Etsy Christmas. And no, I didn't go from 2 sales a week to 1,000 sales a week, but I did end up ending the 2019 year with just under 1,000 in gross revenue from my Etsy sales. Obviously not enough to quit my day job, but it was enough to keep me motivated to learn more about Etsy and continue to expand my shop with more listings and things like that. The first few months in 2020 were about the same as the end of 2019. I was doing 100 to 150 in sales for January, February, and March. April of 2020 is when everything changed. I don't know if you remember, but a little thing called the pandemic happened, and it was April of 2020 when most states completely shut down, meaning that my real estate career got put completely on hold. Myself, along with almost the entire world, were all at home, and I guess they all felt the need to go shopping. Because in March of 2020, I did 136 in gross sales. In April of 2020, I did 1,500. And then in May, I did 3,410 in gross sales on Etsy. I ultimately ended the 2020 year with just shy of 30,000 in gross sales on Etsy. And now all of a sudden the prospect of doing this full time became much more real. And that's what I did. The last piece of real estate I sold was in December of 2020. And then after December of 2020, starting January of 2021, I went full time as an Etsy seller. Keep in mind, 30,000 a year in gross sales is really not enough for a family of 5 like myself to live on. However, my wife was a teacher at the time, and I had residual income from my real estate business. I have rental properties, though most of them are for retirement. I do have them, and I do have rent I can draw on if I need to, but ultimately it was my wife's job as a teacher that gave me the ability to kind of dive into this head first and really see if I can make a go of it. It's a weird thing to say, but really I think I have the pandemic to thank for helping me go full time as an Etsy seller. Had that not happened, I would have continued with my clients. I would have devoted a little bit of time to Etsy, but instead I was put on the unessential list, so I had 100% free time to focus on my Etsy shop. I had people buying from my Etsy shop who were forced to stay home and do shopping. And I think it really is the catalyst that allowed me to go from, a couple hundred in sales a month to thousands in sales a month and catapult me forward to a full-time Etsy seller. And that takes us to today. 3 full years later, I am still a full-time seller on Etsy. However, Etsy only accounts for about 50% of my total income. The other half comes from other 3D printed related activities that I do around content creation and model creation. My wife has since quit her teaching job and she is now with me full time in 3D Design Bros, and thank goodness, because I don't think I would have made it through the Christmas season without her. That is my summed up journey of how I went from a real estate sales broker to a full-time Etsy seller and 3D print farm manager. I hope it serves as great motivation for you guys in 2024. It does not happen overnight. It does take time though, so stick with it. If you are interested in learning more about how I run my 3D print farm, how I run my Etsy shop, how I merge the to, make sure to check out all of our other YouTube videos we've posted. They are full of lots of great content, and I think this is probably the best one for you. So let's start with this one, and I will see you over there.